Hey, sweetheart, you lost? The typing pool's 3 floors down, and I'm pretty sure your coffee break ended an hour ago. Staff Sergeant Corin Voss's voice cut through the Norfolk briefing room like a rusty blade, drawing snickers from the dozen Navy SEALs from Team 4 who turned to stare at Lieutenant Bryn Cadelis. She stood frozen in the doorway, manila folder clutched against her chest, absorbing their contemptuous gazes as they cataloged everything wrong with the picture. No trident insignia, quiet demeanor, and the kind of nervous energy that screamed administrative support who'd wandered into the wrong room. Voss leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, savoring the moment. "Unless you're here to refill the coffee pot, ma'am, I think you might want to find your way back to whatever desk you escaped from." The room erupted in laughter. Senior Chief Cade Morrison muttered something about support staff thinking they understand tactical operations, while Petty Officer Blaze Hendricks made exaggerated typing motions in the air. Technical Specialist Nash Garrett didn't even look up from his laptop, just shook his head with the kind of dismissive contempt reserved for civilians who thought they belonged in warrior spaces. What they saw was exactly what she needed them to see: a lost intelligence clerk who had stumbled into a briefing above her clearance level. What they couldn't see was the 6 years she'd spent inside DVGRU, where operators moved through locked black sites and learned code words that could end careers with a single syllable. They had no way of knowing about the missions she'd planned, the raids she'd orchestrated, or the targeting packages she'd built for operations that never appeared in any official record. Bryn had grown up in rural Montana, where her father, a retired Marine Scout sniper, had taught her to read wind speed by watching grass bend and estimate range by counting heartbeats. By 16, she could put 5 rounds through a 2-inch circle at 400 meters with iron sights. Now 29, she carried a TS-SCI clearance with special access programs so restricted that only a handful of people outside JSOC even knew her unit existed. In 30 minutes, when the senior chief read the header on her JSOC tasking order and his face went pale with recognition, she would watch every expression in that room transform from mockery to something approaching awe. But for now, Corin Voss was still laughing, and Bryn Cadelis was still invisible. Lieutenant Bryn Cadelis was 5 feet 6 inches with a runner's build, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the kind of calm presence that most people mistook for softness. She moved to the back corner of the room with fluid precision, her posture unconsciously perfect, shoulders squared, spine straight, feet positioned exactly shoulder-width apart. The kind of military bearing that became second nature after years of standing in briefing rooms where a single misplaced word could compromise operations spanning multiple continents. Her father had been a Marine Corps Scout sniper with Force Recon, and he had raised her the way he trained young Marines, with patience, precision, and zero tolerance for excuses. He'd taught her that accuracy wasn't about pulling a trigger, it was about controlling breath, reading mirage, calculating density altitude, and making the rifle an extension of the nervous system. She'd grown up hunting mule deer in the Bitterroot Range, learning to move through terrain without sound, to glass ridge lines for hours without losing focus, and to wait in freezing cold until the shot presented itself cleanly. Her mother had been a research chemist, methodical and exact, and she'd passed down a different kind of discipline: the ability to absorb complex systems, see patterns in chaos, and stay 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The combination had made Bryn uniquely suited for the kind of work that existed in the shadows between official military operations and activities that governments couldn't acknowledge. She'd enlisted in the Navy at 21, with a degree in linguistics and a security clearance application already in progress. She'd been selected for the intelligence specialist rating and sent to advanced surveillance training at Dam Neck, where she learned to operate multispectral imaging systems, interpret signals intelligence, and build targeting packages for direct action missions that would never appear in any public record. After 2 years, she completed officer candidate school and was commissioned as an intelligence officer. Shortly after, she was tapped for assignment to DVGRU's mission planning cell, working alongside operators who carried out missions in countries where American forces weren't officially present. She spent the next 6 years in that world, learning how raids were planned, how targets were developed, and how operational security was maintained at levels most people couldn't imagine. She became fluent in the language of violence without ever firing a shot in anger, but she understood the weight of every decision that put American lives at risk in hostile territory. The air in the Norfolk briefing room smelled like stale coffee. and the kind of overconfidence that comes from men who've never had to prove themselves to anyone outside their own tribe. Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek in Virginia Beach housed some of the Navy's most elite units, and the SEALs from Team 4 carried themselves with the swagger of warriors preparing for another deployment to places where their reputation preceded them. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood at the front of the room, consulting his briefing materials while the team settled into their chairs. His weathered face showed the strain of multiple deployments to the Horn of Africa, where American Special Operations Forces conducted missions that balanced strategic objectives against political sensitivities that could shift with each news cycle. You're watching one of those stories that's about to completely flip everything you think you know. If you've ever been underestimated because people couldn't see past the surface, this next part is going to be different. But before we dive into how Bryn's about to shut down every single doubter in that room, smash that subscribe button, because stories like this one, where the quiet ones turn out to be the most dangerous, don't come around every day. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Gentlemen, Hayes began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd briefed operations that had strategic implications beyond their immediate tactical objectives. Operation Desert Falcon. We have a high-value target that's been operating with impunity in southern Somalia for the past 8 months. He activated the projection system, and satellite imagery of the Horn of Africa filled the screen mounted on the far wall. The compound appeared as a collection of concrete buildings surrounded by walls that cast sharp shadows in the harsh African sunlight. Guard towers at each corner, a single access road winding through scrubland that offered minimal concealment for approaching forces. Abu Rashid al-Shabaab, former Taliban commander who relocated to East Africa after coalition forces disrupted his operations in Afghanistan. Intelligence indicates he's established a new command center approximately 12 kilometers north of Kismayo, coordinating operations that have resulted in 17 American casualties over the past 6 months. The number hit the room with appropriate weight. 17 casualties meant 17 families receiving folded flags. 17 funerals where honor guards fired volleys over caskets that contained the bodies of men who had died far from home in service of objectives that most Americans would never understand. Hayes clicked through reconnaissance photos showing the target's daily routine. Pattern of life analysis indicated a man who maintained operational security through routine, arriving at the compound each morning at approximately 0600 hours and departing before sunset to locations that remained unknown to American intelligence assets. The primary objective is capture and extraction for intelligence exploitation. Secondary objectives include document recovery and elimination of key lieutenants who've been coordinating attacks on coalition forces throughout the region. Senior Chief Morrison leaned forward, his attention focused on tactical details that would determine how 17 American deaths might be avenged through precise application of violence in a hostile country. 20 years of naval service had taught him that successful operations required attention to details that most people never considered. "Sir, what's our insertion method and timeline?" Hayes consulted his mission planning materials, outlining an operation that followed established procedures for direct action raids in contested territory. Helicopter insertion at landing zone. Charlie, approximately 8 kilometers south of the target. Ground approach during hours of darkness, with assault commencing at 0430 to maximize surprise and concealment. The timeline was standard for operations designed to minimize enemy response time while providing maximum tactical advantage to assault forces. Early morning raids had proven most effective for capturing targets before they could organize defensive responses or escape to prepared positions. Entry Team Alpha will breach the southern entrance based on intelligence analysis, indicating minimal defensive coverage from that approach vector. Hayes highlighted the tactical overlay on the satellite image, showing approach routes that avoided known guard positions and defensive arrangements visible in overhead reconnaissance. Bryn studied the imagery with trained eyes, automatically cataloging details that seemed inconsistent with the operational narrative being presented. The guard tower positioning created overlapping fields of fire that would make the proposed southern approach extremely hazardous. Recent construction debris visible in one photograph suggested modifications to the compound's defensive arrangements that weren't reflected in the mission planning timeline. But speaking up would mean breaking cover, revealing knowledge that a simple intelligence observer shouldn't possess. She'd been sent to Norfolk to assess the team's operational readiness, not to participate in mission planning. Her role was to observe and report back to higher command about Team 4's capability to handle sensitive intelligence during their upcoming rotation. Hayes continued outlining tactical procedures that followed standard special operations doctrine. Entry Team Bravo establishes overwatch positions on the ridgeline to provide sniper support and early warning of enemy reinforcements. Communication protocols will maintain operational security while providing real-time intelligence to command elements. Technical Specialist Garrett pulled up communications intercepts on his laptop, displaying signals intelligence that had been collected over the past 72 hours. Sir, SIGINT indicates increased radio chatter in the target area. The enemy appears to be expecting some kind of action, possibly related to government forces operating in the region. The intelligence was concerning, but not unexpected. Somalia's complex political situation meant that multiple factions maintained intelligence networks that could detect American operational preparations, especially when those preparations involved the movement of personnel and equipment that exceeded normal embassy security requirements. Staff Sergeant Voss crossed his arms and glanced toward Bryn with barely concealed annoyance. Sir, with all due respect, having observers in operational briefings compromises security. We're discussing classified mission parameters with personnel who don't appear to have appropriate clearances. The objection was procedurally correct but politically problematic. Observer assignments came from command levels that exceeded Voss's authority to question, regardless of his concerns about operational security. His suspicion was understandable but misplaced. He couldn't know that the observer in question held clearances that exceeded his own. Hayes consulted his briefing authorization, confirming details that had been provided through official channels. Staff Sergeant, Lieutenant Cadellis has been cleared to observe this briefing. Her presence has been authorized by higher command. The explanation provided procedural cover, but didn't address underlying questions about why administrative personnel would be observing tactical briefings that involved classified information about operations in active combat zones. Military bureaucracy often created situations that appeared illogical to operational personnel who focused on immediate tactical requirements. Entry Team Alpha will approach through the Wadi system that provides concealment from observation posts while maintaining tactical flexibility for rapid assault. Hayes traced the approach route on the satellite display, highlighting terrain features that would provide cover and concealment for forces moving across open ground under enemy observation. Bryn felt the familiar tightness in her chest as she recognized tactical flaws that could result in casualties. The operational plan looked solid on paper, but operational plans were only as good as the intelligence they were based on. The reconnaissance imagery was 72 hours old, possibly longer. The tactical situation on the ground had almost certainly changed since the photographs were taken. She could see indicators that the briefing team had missed, subtle changes in the compound's defensive arrangements that suggested heightened security awareness, construction activity that appeared routine but could represent significant modifications to protective barriers, vehicle tracks that indicated movement patterns inconsistent with normal daily routines. Her father had taught her to trust her instincts when something felt wrong, even if she couldn't immediately articulate the specific nature of the threat. Military operations always involved calculated risks, but accepting unnecessary risks because of arbitrary adherence to predetermined plans was the kind of mistake that ended careers and cost lives. The briefing continued with standard tactical procedures, communications protocols, medical evacuation plans, rules of engagement that balanced operational objectives against political sensitivities that could affect strategic relationships across the region. Everything appeared professional, competent, thoroughly planned, except for the intelligence gaps that could get people killed. Hayes moved to the next phase of the operational timeline. Assault phase begins with simultaneous breaches at primary and secondary entry points. Rules of engagement authorize deadly force against armed combatants, but require positive identification before engaging personnel who may be civilians or coerced participants. The ROE were standard for operations in areas where civilian presence complicated tactical decision-making. Somalia's chaotic political situation meant that distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants often required split-second decisions under combat conditions where mistakes could have strategic implications. Senior Chief Morrison consulted his tactical notes, considering logistical requirements for an operation that would unfold far from conventional support structures. Sir, what's our contingency if the target isn't present when we arrive? Intelligence confidence is high that Al-Shabaab maintains regular presence at the compound. If he's not there during the assault, we proceed with secondary objectives and extract any intelligence materials that might indicate his current location or future operational plans. The contingency planning was thorough, but based on intelligence assessments that assumed enemy behavior patterns remained consistent with previous observations. Military planning required making assumptions about enemy actions, but those assumptions became dangerous when they weren't regularly updated with current information. Bryn found herself weighing operational security against mission safety, recognizing that her intervention could compromise ongoing activities while potentially preventing casualties that appeared increasingly likely given the intelligence gaps she'd identified. She raised her hand. The gesture was small, professional, almost tentative, but it cut through the briefing room atmosphere like a sword through silk, drawing every eye in the room to the intelligence observer, who'd been quietly taking notes in the back corner. Lieutenant Commander Hayes paused mid-sentence, his expression showing mild irritation at the interruption. He glanced at her name tape, noted the lack of Trident insignia on her uniform, and delivered the kind of dismissal that administrative personnel received in operational briefings. "Ma'am, your input isn't required at this stage of planning." The rebuke was professionally delivered, but carried enough edge to remind everyone in the room about the hierarchy that separated warriors from support staff. Hayes wasn't being deliberately cruel. He was maintaining operational security and briefing discipline in an environment where unauthorized input could compromise mission effectiveness. One of the senior enlisted SEALs in the front row turned around and grinned, muttering something to the man beside him about administrative clerks who thought they understood tactical operations. The comment was delivered quietly but audibly, ensuring that Bryn could hear the mockery while maintaining plausible deniability about intentional disrespect. The room filled with the kind of quiet laughter that wounded more deeply than open hostility. Professional mockery that reminded her of every briefing where her presence was tolerated but never welcomed. Every operational discussion where her expertise was dismissed because it didn't come wrapped in the right credentials. Bryn kept her voice level and professional, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Sir, the southern entrance is a kill zone." The statement was delivered with quiet authority that suggested knowledge beyond what administrative personnel typically possessed. Kill zone was tactical terminology that most support staff wouldn't use casually, and her tone carried conviction that went beyond theoretical understanding. Hayes's expression shifted from mild irritation to active annoyance. The intelligence observer was not only interrupting his briefing, but contradicting tactical assessments that had been developed by experienced operators with multiple combat deployments. "Ma'am, our planning team has reviewed all available intelligence and identified the southern approach as the most viable entry point based on current defensive arrangements." The response was professionally correct, but carried undertones of condescension that every woman in military service had learned to recognize. The gentle but firm dismissal that suggested her concerns were noted, but not particularly valuable to operational professionals. Bryn consulted the notepad where she'd been cataloging intelligence discrepancies, referring to observations that most people would have missed entirely. "Sir, the most recent overhead imagery I've reviewed shows 2 crew-served weapons positioned in defilade with interlocking fields of fire that would devastate the first 4 men through that entrance." The technical precision of her assessment caught everyone's attention. Defilade positioning and interlocking fields of fire weren't concepts that administrative personnel typically understood, much less used in casual conversation about tactical planning. Hayes consulted his briefing materials, checking intelligence assessments that formed the foundation of their operational planning. "Our imagery analysis doesn't show crew-served weapons in defensive positions." "Sir, what's the timestamp on your primary reconnaissance photography?" The question was delivered with enough technical knowledge to suggest familiarity with intelligence collection procedures that went beyond casual observation. Timestamps on reconnaissance imagery were critical details that affected tactical validity, but most people outside the intelligence community wouldn't understand their operational significance. Hayes checked his briefing package, frowning slightly as he realized the gap between intelligence collection and mission execution. 72 hours ago, which is standard timeline for mission development at this operational level. I can see the comments already. Half of you are calling this fake. The other half are absolutely invested. That's exactly how it should be with a story this wild. If your team, this is actually happening, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. The next revelation is going to make the satellite imagery look like child's play. Sir, I'm referencing imagery that's 16 hours old. The tactical situation has changed significantly since your original intelligence collection. The statement hit the briefing room like lightning. Imagery that was 16 hours old meant access to intelligence collection assets that most military units couldn't task independently. Real-time reconnaissance required authorization levels and technical capabilities that exceeded normal operational support. Lieutenant Commander Hayes's face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from having professional competence questioned by someone who appeared to lack appropriate credentials. Ma'am, I don't know what unit you're assigned to or what you think you know about mission planning, but our intelligence assessment is based on all available collection assets. The rebuke was sharp, personal, designed to remind her of her place in a hierarchy that didn't welcome input from personnel who hadn't earned the right to question tactical decisions made by combat veterans. Senior Chief Morrison turned in his chair to face her directly, his 20 years of naval service evident in the way he carried himself. Combat deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and multiple locations that didn't appear in his official record had taught him to be suspicious of personnel who claimed knowledge they couldn't properly explain. Ma'am, have you ever been outside the wire? Have you ever planned a real mission where people's lives depend on getting the details right? Or is your idea of operational planning sitting in an air-conditioned tactical operations center, drinking lattes while real operators do the dangerous work? The challenge was brutal, personal, designed to expose her as another rear-echelon administrator who thought proximity to operational planning qualified her to question decisions made by professionals who had earned their expertise through blood and experience. The room went cold with the kind of contempt that doesn't need to be shouted. Professional warriors who'd proven themselves in combat zones that tested every aspect of their training and character, facing someone who appeared to represent the bureaucratic oversight that complicated their ability to accomplish missions and protect American interests. Bryn felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced in dozens of briefing rooms where her presence was questioned, her expertise dismissed, her contributions marginalized by people who couldn't see beyond surface appearances to recognize the depth of experience she represented. She thought about the first time she'd walked into a DVGRU briefing and heard an operator ask if she was someone's girlfriend who'd gotten lost on her way to the commissary, the casual dismissal that assumed incompetence based on appearance rather than capability. She thought about the hundreds of hours she'd spent building target folders, cross-referencing signals, intelligence with human intelligence reports, identifying vulnerabilities that transformed missions from coin flips into surgical strikes that achieved objectives while minimizing casualties to both American forces and civilian populations. She thought about the operators who'd returned from missions and thanked her quietly, away from everyone else, because they understood what she'd contributed even if they couldn't acknowledge it publicly, in environments where reputation and credibility were earned through different criteria. Her father had told her once that respect was never given freely. It was earned by proving capability under pressure, by demonstrating competence that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. He'd said the world would always underestimate her because they couldn't see past surface appearances, which meant she'd have to be twice as sharp, twice as precise, and twice as calm under pressure. She could feel the weight of hostile stares from men who measured worth in deployment patches and combat awards that she'd never earned because her contributions occurred in places that didn't officially exist, supporting operations that were never acknowledged by governments that depended on their success. They saw exactly what they expected to see: a woman in utilities without a trident, without deployment patches, without the tribal markers that signaled legitimacy in their world. They didn't know about the missions she'd supported, the targets she'd identified, the intelligence gaps she'd filled when operations hung in the balance and American lives depended on precision that couldn't tolerate mistakes. The operational planning she'd conducted over 6 years had saved more American lives than most people in that room would affect during their entire careers. But her contributions occurred in classified environments where success was measured by missions that never became public knowledge, where the absence of casualties was the only recognition that mattered. She took a slow breath and made a decision that would change everything, not just for the mission they were planning, but for everyone in the room who thought they understood the nature of the war they were fighting and the people who were fighting it on their behalf. Speaking of military-grade technology, the kind of satellite systems Bryn was accessing require specialized hardware that can process classified data streams in real time. Military communications depend on ruggedized tablets and secure devices built to withstand extreme operational conditions. These advanced systems feature biometric security, encrypted processors, and connectivity protocols that ensure operational security even in hostile environments. The technology Brin demonstrated represents the cutting edge of military intelligence capabilities, where failure isn't an option. Brin stood and walked to the front of the room, her movement drawing surprised attention from team members who hadn't expected an administrative observer to take such initiative. Lieutenant Commander Hayes watched her approach, with expression that mixed irritation with professional curiosity about what exactly she thought she was doing. "Sir, is this briefing space a cleared skiff?" The question was delivered with technical precision that suggested familiarity with security protocols that went beyond casual knowledge. SESCIF classification was a detail that most administrative personnel wouldn't understand, much less reference in operational discussions. Hayes consulted his briefing authorization, confirming security details that had been established before the meeting began. Yes, this is an accredited temporary SCIF with all personnel holding at least secret clearances for this operation. The confirmation meant that the briefing space met security requirements for discussing classified information up to specific levels, but it also meant that everyone present had been vetted for access to sensitive operational details that could affect national security if compromised. "Sir, may I have access to the JWICS terminal?" The request was casual, almost offhanded, but it hit the room like an artillery round. JWICS terminals required security clearances that most military personnel never achieved, much less used routinely enough to request access without explaining why they needed it. Senior Chief Morrison exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Commander Hayes, both men processing the implications of someone casually requesting access to classified computer systems that were restricted to intelligence professionals with specialized clearances and operational requirements. After a long pause that seemed to stretch across minutes rather than seconds, Hayes nodded toward the secure workstation positioned at the front of the briefing room. Granted, Brin approached the terminal and inserted her common access card into the reader, entering her personal identification number with the fluid ease of someone completely familiar with security protocols. The computer screen flashed a series of compartmentalized access banners that made two people in the front row lean forward with expressions of surprise and growing concern. The clearance indicators displayed were beyond what most operational personnel had ever seen outside of specialized assignments that most people never encountered directly. Compartmentalized access programs that were restricted to personnel working on operations so sensitive that their existence was classified beyond normal procedures. She navigated to a national imagery database that required role-based authentication and pulled up satellite coverage of the Horn of Africa with resolution that made the briefing materials look primitive by comparison. The interface was complex, designed for intelligence professionals who understood technical specifications of different collection platforms and their operational capabilities. "Sir, this is current overhead imagery of the target compound." Her voice carried calm professionalism, despite the fact that everyone in the room was now staring at her with expressions that ranged from confusion to alarm. The satellite image that appeared on the screen showed the target compound in near real-time resolution that revealed details invisible in the 72-hour-old reconnaissance photography that formed the foundation of their mission planning. Every shadow, every defensive position, every indication of recent activity was visible with clarity that transformed their understanding of the tactical situation. "Holy cow," breathed Petty Officer Hendricks, his voice carrying awe that was entirely unfeigned. "Look at the southern approach corridor." The current imagery showed exactly what Brin had predicted. The construction debris visible in older photographs had been transformed into carefully positioned defensive barriers that would channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones. Machine gun nests were clearly visible at positions that would create devastating crossfire across the approach route that Hayes had selected based on outdated intelligence. Senior Chief Morrison leaned forward to study tactical implications that were becoming increasingly alarming. "Those positions weren't there 72 hours ago. They've been preparing for us." The observation carried weight that extended beyond tactical considerations into operational security concerns that could affect strategic objectives. Enemy forces that modified defensive preparations in response to American operational planning suggested intelligence penetration that exceeded tactical inconvenience. But the machine gun positions weren't the worst discovery revealed by current imagery. Bryn zoomed in on terrain features that hadn't been visible in previous reconnaissance, highlighting details that transformed their entire understanding of the threat environment they'd be operating in. "Sir, there's a staged ambush element in the tree line approximately 200 meters east of the compound. Company-sized force positioned to interdict retreat routes and provide flanking fire against assault elements." The ambush force was positioned with tactical precision that demonstrated detailed knowledge of American operational procedures. Not just awareness that an attack might be coming, but specific understanding of how that attack would be conducted and what route withdrawal forces would use if the operation became compromised. Hayes consulted his original mission planning materials, comparing them to intelligence that revealed a tactical situation so fundamentally different from their assumptions that their operational plan was essentially suicidal. That's a complete game changer. Technical specialist Garrett was rapidly analyzing the new intelligence, cross-referencing it with communications intercepts that suddenly made more sense in context of what they were seeing. "Sir, the increased radio chatter correlates with defensive preparations visible in this imagery. They have definitely been alerted to potential American operations." The confirmation added another layer of concern to a situation that was deteriorating rapidly. Not only had the enemy modified their defensive preparations, but they'd done so in response to specific intelligence about American operational intentions that shouldn't have been available to hostile forces. The room had gone completely silent as everyone processed implications that extended far beyond their individual mission into questions about operational security that could affect strategic operations throughout the region. Systematic intelligence penetration that allowed enemy forces to anticipate and counter American tactical procedures. Senior Chief Morrison was the first to speak, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of operational experience that had taught him to recognize when situations were fundamentally different from what they appeared to be. "Ma'am, where exactly did you get this imagery?" The question hung in the air with implications that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to articulate directly. Current overhead imagery with this level of resolution required access to national collection assets that most military personnel never encountered, much less tasked independently for tactical operations. Bryn highlighted additional features in the satellite coverage, her analysis revealing intelligence capabilities that went far beyond what administrative personnel typically possessed. "Sir, this comes from a national asset specifically tasked to support JSOC operations. Access requires special compartmented program clearances that most conventional units don't carry." The explanation was professionally delivered, but carried implications that left everyone staring. Special compartmented programs clearances were restricted to personnel working on operations at the highest levels of classification, activities that existed in the shadows between acknowledged military operations and actions that governments couldn't officially recognize. Lieutenant Commander Hayes asked the question that everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to voice directly. "What unit are you actually assigned to?" His tone had changed completely from the dismissive authority he had used earlier. No more condescension, no more casual assumption of superiority based on apparent credentials. The flat, careful tone of someone who would realize they might be dealing with capabilities they didn't understand. Bryn pulled up additional imagery from different angles that revealed the full scope of defensive preparations that weren't apparent in single reconnaissance photographs. The compound had been transformed into a fortress designed specifically to counter American tactical procedures, with overlapping fields of fire and defensive positions that suggested detailed knowledge of how special operations forces conducted similar missions. "Sir, I've been working direct action mission planning and targeting for the last 6 years. I've supported more raids than most people in this room have deployed on." The statement was delivered matter-of-factly, without drama or emphasis, but it landed in the room like a hand grenade. Mission planning and targeting for direct action raids required clearances and experience that exceeded what most operational personnel achieved during entire careers. Senior Chief Morrison's expression had shifted from skepticism to something approaching wariness. 20 years of naval service had taught Ifis to recognize when he was dealing with capabilities that exceeded his own experience, even when those capabilities came packaged in ways he didn't immediately recognize. "Ma'am, that requires clearances and experience that most of us don't have access to." The admission was professionally delivered, but carried personal weight. Morrison had spent 2 decades in naval special operations without achieving the kind of clearances and operational experience that the intelligence observer was casually claiming to possess. Hayes was processing implications that extended beyond their immediate mission into questions about how their routine operational briefing had suddenly involved personnel with capabilities that exceeded their command structure. "Lieutenant, I'm going to need you to properly identify your tasking authority." The request was formally correct, but carried undertones of challenge that suggested Hayes was beginning to understand he might be dealing with operational oversight at levels he hadn't anticipated when the briefing began. Bryn reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a folded document that she handed to Hayes without comment. The gesture was casual, routine, but everyone in the room watched the exchange with attention that betrayed their growing awareness that standard assumptions about the personnel situation were proving incorrect. Hayes unfolded the document and read the header, his expression changing immediately as he processed information that transformed his understanding of the authority structure governing their operational planning. The communication was official, formal, carrying authorization codes that exceeded normal command channels. "JSOC Operational Tasking Order," he read aloud, his voice carrying a surprise that wasn't entirely professional. "Embedded mission planner for this unit's rotation with authority to provide targeting guidance and assess operational planning procedures." The document contained authorization language that most military personnel never encountered directly. JSOC tasking orders were reserved for operations that carried strategic implications beyond tactical objectives, activities that required coordination at levels that exceeded normal military command structures. Senior Chief Morrison read the header information, and his face went pale. 20 years of military service had taught him to recognize the significance of authorization codes that appeared on documents he'd never seen before, orders that carried implications about operational activities beyond his direct experience. The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. The casual confidence that had characterized his dismissal of the intelligence observer was replaced by something approaching professional alarm as he realized the implications of what he was reading. Bryn leaned closer to the senior chief, her movement drawing his full attention in a way that suggested the conversation was about to shift into territory that would affect everyone's understanding of their current situation. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying authority that couldn't be faked or learned through training. The words she chose were specific, technical, carrying weight that extended far beyond their immediate tactical application. "Senior Chief, for mission validation and operational standing confirmation, Crimson Shepherd 7. The phrase was delivered almost casually, but it hit Morrison like a physical blow. The validation code was used exclusively within JSOC special mission units to confirm compartmentalized access to operations that existed beyond normal military structure. It wasn't something that could be faked, wasn't something that anyone outside that specific operational community would ever hear. The code phrase authenticated her role in ways that exceeded normal security procedures, confirming operational standing that carried authority to direct mission planning inputs for operations involving sensitive targeting data and tactical procedures that most people never encountered. Morrison's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The validation phrase confirmed everything that the JSOC tasking order had suggested, providing authentication that couldn't be questioned or dismissed by personnel who understood its significance. His face had gone completely pale, drained of color as recognition of what he was dealing with hit him like artillery. 20 years of naval service, multiple combat deployments, extensive experience with classified operations, and he'd never encountered anyone with the kind of operational authority that the intelligence observer had just confirmed. "Okay, we're at the point where you either believe this is real or you're convinced I'm making it up. Either way, you're still here, which means you need to see how this ends." The code phrase she's about to speak, let's just say Captain Reynolds is about to have the worst 5 seconds of his career. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was studying the JSOC tasking order with growing awareness that their routine mission briefing had escalated into something far beyond normal operational planning. The authorization codes referenced operational capabilities that he'd heard about but never encountered directly. "Lieutenant, why didn't you identify yourself at the beginning of this briefing?" The question was professionally delivered, but carried undertones of concern about security protocols and command procedures that should have been followed from the beginning of their operational discussion. Bryn retrieved the tasking order from Hayes, folding it carefully before returning it to her breast pocket. "Sir, I was sent to observe your planning process and assess whether this unit was prepared to handle sensitive intelligence during the upcoming rotation. The explanation provided context for her presence, but also revealed that their operational capabilities were being evaluated at levels that exceeded their immediate command structure. Assessment by JSOC. Mission planning personnel suggested oversight that carried implications about strategic importance. I hadn't intended to intervene in your planning process, she continued, her voice carrying quiet authority that had been absent during the earlier phases of the briefing. But when I identified tactical flaws that would result in American casualties, I couldn't remain silent. The statement was delivered matter-of-factly, but it carried implications about operational authority that extended far beyond observer status. Personnel with authority to intervene in mission planning, based on tactical assessments, possessed capabilities that most military units never encountered directly. Hayes was coordinating with higher command through secure communication channels, apparently discussing resource requirements and authorization procedures that weren't normally associated with routine tactical operations. His conversations were conducted in terminology that most people in the room couldn't fully interpret. "Lieutenant, I'm receiving confirmation from higher command. Your intervention has been noted and approved. We're authorized to proceed with mission revision based on your intelligence assessments." The authorization suggested that their mission had attracted attention at levels that exceeded normal command interest. Operations that received personal attention from JSOC command carried implications about strategic significance that went beyond immediate tactical objectives. Bryn walked them through the revised entry plan step by step, her analysis revealing tactical alternatives that addressed every flaw she'd identified in their original approach. Her recommendations integrated current intelligence with operational procedures in ways that demonstrated extensive experience with complex mission planning. The northern entrance provides a concealed approach through terrain that avoids both the machine gun positions and the ambush element. Entry timing needs to shift by 2 hours to account for patrol patterns identified in pattern-of-life analysis conducted over the past 96 hours. The revised plan was comprehensive, addressing not just immediate tactical concerns, but operational security issues that could affect strategic outcomes. Her recommendations reflected understanding of enemy procedures and American capabilities that required years of specialized experience. She referenced communications intercepts that indicated the target had been alerted to potential American activity in the region, though she kept those details at summary level, given the mixed clearance levels present in the briefing room. Intelligence indicates compromised operational security, but the northern approach avoids prepared defensive positions. The explanation provided tactical justification while maintaining operational security protocols that protected sensitive intelligence sources and collection methods. Professional intelligence personnel learned to share necessary information while protecting capabilities that could be compromised by excessive disclosure. When she finished her presentation, the briefing room was completely silent. Senior Chief Morrison studied the revised imagery, comparing it to tactical assumptions that had formed the foundation of their original planning. The difference was striking, fundamental, potentially life-saving. "Ma'am, we'd have walked directly into that ambush using our original plan," he admitted quietly. "Your intervention prevented casualties that would have been completely avoidable with current intelligence." The acknowledgement carried professional weight. Morrison wasn't given to admitting tactical errors, especially not errors pointed out by personnel he'd initially dismissed as administrative support who lacked relevant operational experience. Hayes was coordinating with logistics personnel to confirm availability of resources required for the revised operational timeline. "Lieutenant, we'll scrub the original plan and rebuild around your recommendations. Mission execution will proceed with modifications you've specified." The decision represented complete acceptance of her tactical assessment and operational authority. Scrubbing established mission plans based on intelligence provided by embedded JSOC personnel suggested command recognition that exceeded normal operational oversight. Deep cover operatives like Bryn require specialized financial protection that accounts for their unique operational risks. Intelligence personnel need insurance coverage that recognizes deployment hazards, disability benefits for classified injuries, and investment portfolios designed around irregular income patterns. These comprehensive financial security programs provide life insurance, retirement planning, and asset protection, specifically tailored for personnel whose official records can't reflect their true service contributions or operational exposures. financial security designed for heroes who can't talk about their real work. Over the following 3 days, final mission preparations proceeded according to the revised timeline that Bryn had recommended. Intelligence collection continued through channels that she'd established, providing real-time updates on enemy defensive preparations and patrol schedules that affected tactical timing. The operation went forward exactly as she'd planned it. The assault force approached through the northern entrance under cover of darkness, moving through terrain that provided concealment from enemy observation, while avoiding prepared defensive positions that would have devastated forces using the original approach route. Entry Team Alpha breached the compound walls without encountering resistance, neutralizing security elements that hadn't anticipated attack from the revised approach vector. The target was captured in his sleeping quarters without having opportunity to alert reinforcements or destroy intelligence materials that provided strategic information about terrorist operations throughout the region. Document recovery exceeded original objectives, providing intelligence that identified terrorist networks across multiple countries and operational plans that would have resulted in significant American casualties if they had been executed successfully. The captured materials represented one of the most significant intelligence coups in the Horn of Africa over the past 2 years. The assault force exfiltrated cleanly using routes that avoided enemy reinforcements attempting to respond to the attack. No American casualties, no civilian casualties. Complete mission success with strategic intelligence gains that exceeded original objectives by substantial margins. The after-action report specifically noted that intelligence provided by an embedded JSOC mission planner had been critical to mission success, preventing American casualties while ensuring complete achievement of operational objectives. The team leader submitted a formal commendation, citing her work as directly responsible for tactical success and force protection. Back at Little Creek, the professional dynamic had changed completely from the dismissive atmosphere that had characterized the initial briefing. Senior Chief Morrison found Bryn in the intelligence workspace and approached her with expression that mixed professional respect with personal acknowledgement of his earlier misjudgment. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your capabilities and your contributions to operational success." The acknowledgement was formally delivered but carried personal weight. Morrison had spent 20 years building his reputation on tactical competence and operational judgment. Admitting error required professional courage that not everyone possessed. Hayes sent her a message through official channels, thanking her for the intervention and requesting her assistance on future operations that the team would conduct during their upcoming rotation. "Your expertise prevented casualties and ensured mission success. We'd be honored to work with you again." Other members of the team began approaching her with questions about targeting methodology and intelligence analysis, seeking professional development that would improve their own operational capabilities. The dismissive atmosphere had been replaced by genuine respect for expertise that had proven itself under operational pressure. Petty Officer Hendricks, who'd made typing motions during the initial briefing, approached her privately with questions about intelligence career fields and the qualifications required for specialized assignments. His earlier mockery had evolved into professional interest based on demonstrated competence. Technical Specialist Garrett requested guidance on accessing classified databases and intelligence resources that could support future mission planning. The capabilities she had demonstrated had revealed operational possibilities that the team hadn't previously understood. That moment when everyone's faces just changed. You saw it coming, but it still hit like a freight train, right? This is what real respect looks like. Subscribe for more stories about people who prove that the most dangerous ones are often hiding in plain sight. The next video drops tomorrow. Bryn didn't gloat about the transformation in professional attitudes. She had accomplished what she'd been trained to do: identify tactical problems, provide operational solutions, and ensure mission success while protecting American lives. Her father's wisdom had proven correct once again. Competence spoke louder than any argument. She remained at Little Creek for another 2 weeks, working closely with Team 4 to prepare them for operational challenges they would face during their rotation. Her embedded assessment confirmed that the unit was capable of handling sensitive intelligence and complex mission planning, but they benefited significantly from exposure to JSOC operational procedures. The professional relationships that developed during those 2 weeks represented the kind of inter-unit cooperation that made American Special Operations Forces uniquely effective. Conventional units with access to specialized intelligence support achieved operational results that exceeded what either capability could accomplish independently. When her assignment concluded and she prepared to depart Norfolk, Senior Chief Morrison approached her one final time with acknowledgement that carried weight beyond formal professional courtesy. "Ma'am, you've changed how we approach intelligence support and mission planning. We understand now that the most effective operations require capabilities we didn't previously recognize." The statement represented a fundamental change in professional attitudes that extended beyond individual opinion into institutional recognition of specialized contributions that often remained invisible to operational personnel who focused on immediate tactical requirements. Brin's response was characteristic of the quiet professionalism that had defined her career in environments where recognition came through results rather than public acknowledgement. "Senior Chief, I wasn't providing support. I was demonstrating that effective operations require understanding capabilities that don't always wear the uniforms you expect. The legal implications of misidentifying classified personnel can be career-ending. Military legal education programs teach officers how to navigate security clearance protocols, classification levels, and proper procedures for handling sensitive situations. These specialized courses cover operational law, intelligence oversight, and the legal frameworks that protect both classified operations and personnel rights. Professional development in military law ensures that leaders understand the consequences of security breaches and the proper procedures for managing classified situations. The final lesson from Operation Desert Falcon extended far beyond tactical success into understanding that modern warfare required integration of capabilities that transcended traditional military boundaries. The most dangerous enemies operated in shadows between conventional threats and asymmetric challenges that demanded responses from personnel who existed in similar shadows. Brin's intervention had prevented American casualties while ensuring mission success, but more importantly, it had demonstrated that effective operations required recognizing expertise regardless of how that expertise was packaged or where it originated. The quiet intelligence observer, who had initially been dismissed as administrative support, had proven to be exactly the kind of specialized capability that made the difference between mission success and tactical disaster. Her father's training had prepared her for environments where appearance was deceived and capability was measured by results rather than credentials. The Montana ranch where she'd learned to read wind patterns and calculate range by counting heartbeats had been preparation for briefing rooms where lives depended on precision that couldn't tolerate mistakes. The transformation in professional attitudes represented recognition that modern military operations required capabilities that often remained invisible until operational pressure revealed their true value. Personnel who planned missions that didn't officially exist, who possessed clearances that exceeded normal military structures, who operated in spaces between acknowledged activities and strategic necessities. As Brin departed Norfolk and returned to assignments that would never appear in public records, she carried with her the satisfaction that came from protecting American lives while advancing operational objectives that served national interests beyond immediate tactical success. Her work would continue in briefing rooms and planning cells where the next generation of threats required responses from people who understood that victory often came from capabilities that enemies couldn't anticipate. The operators of Team 4 would carry forward lessons learned about intelligence integration and mission planning that would serve them throughout their careers. They'd learn to recognize expertise regardless of how it was presented, to value contributions based on results rather than appearance, and to understand that the most effective operations often depended on capabilities they hadn't previously understood. In the end, Operation Desert Falcon succeeded because someone had been willing to speak up when tactical flaws threatened American lives. Regardless of the professional risks associated with breaking cover and revealing capabilities that were supposed to remain invisible, the quiet intelligence observer had proven that real strength often came disguised as weakness, that the most dangerous people were often hiding in plain sight, and that competence would always triumph over assumption when lives hung in the balance. The mission's success became part of Team 4's operational legacy, a reminder that effective leadership required recognizing capabilities wherever they appeared and integrating them into operations that demanded the best from every person involved. The typing pool joke that had started their interaction became a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating people based on surface appearances. Staff Sergeant Voss, who had initiated the mockery during the initial briefing, approached Bryn privately before her departure with acknowledgement that required significant personal courage. "Ma'am, I was completely wrong about who you are and what you bring to operations. I learned something important about not judging people by appearances." The apology was genuine, personal, representing the kind of professional growth that separated good military personnel from exceptional ones. Voss had learned that his initial assumptions had been not just incorrect, but potentially dangerous in operational environments where recognizing capability could mean the difference between success and failure. Bryn's response was gracious, but carried the kind of wisdom that came from years of experience in environments where being underestimated was often a tactical advantage. "Staff Sergeant, people see what they expect to see. Sometimes that works in our favor." The observation contained layers of meaning that extended beyond their immediate interaction into broader understanding of how perception affected operational reality. Personnel who appeared harmless often possessed capabilities that enemies couldn't anticipate, providing strategic advantages that conventional forces couldn't achieve through traditional approaches. As she walked away from Norfolk Naval Base for the final time, Bryn Cadelis carried with her the knowledge that her intervention had prevented American casualties while ensuring mission success that would have strategic implications throughout the Horn of Africa. The quiet intelligence officer who had been dismissed as administrative support had once again proven that appearances could deceive, that capability came in many forms, and that the most effective warriors were often the ones nobody saw coming. Her secure phone buzzed with notification of her next assignment, another mission that would require capabilities that existed in shadows between official military operations and activities that governments couldn't acknowledge. The work continued in briefing rooms and operational theaters where American interests were protected by people whose contributions would never receive public recognition, but whose precision under pressure made victory possible. Operation Desert Falcon had ended exactly as her father had taught her successful missions should end, with objectives achieved, lives protected, and lessons learned that would make future operations more effective. The Typing Pool refugee had proven once again that real operators didn't need to advertise their capabilities. They simply demonstrated them when lives depended on precision that couldn't tolerate failure. The story would never appear in official records or public accounts of American military operations in the Horn of Africa. But the operators who'd participated would remember the lesson about recognizing expertise regardless of how it was packaged, about integrating capabilities that transcended traditional boundaries, and about understanding that victory often came from people who remained invisible until operational pressure revealed their true value. In the end, that was exactly how Bryn Cadelis preferred it. Mission accomplished. Lives saved. Back to the shadows where the next threat was waiting for someone qualified to handle problems that conventional approaches couldn't solve. The quiet professional who understood that real strength often came disguised as weakness, and that the most dangerous people in any room were usually the ones nobody noticed until it was far too late to do anything about it. The secure communication device in Bryn's hand displayed a priority message with routing codes that most military personnel had never seen outside of crisis situations involving national security threats. The timing wasn't coincidental. Successful completion of Operation Desert Falcon had generated intelligence that created new operational requirements across multiple theaters of operation. She read the encrypted message while walking across the Norfolk parking lot toward her government vehicle, noting details that suggested her next assignment would involve capabilities that exceeded even the specialized work she'd been conducting with DVGRU. The communication referenced operational parameters that existed at the intersection of military action and intelligence operations, activities that required personnel with clearances that transcended normal organizational boundaries. Ghost 7, priority tasking. Compartmented briefing required within 72 hours. Authentication, Midnight Serpent actual. The authentication code confirmed what she'd suspected since receiving the initial communication. Her intervention at Norfolk had attracted attention from organizational levels that operated beyond JSOC's normal command structure, agencies that existed in the spaces between acknowledged military operations and activities that democratic governments conducted but couldn't officially recognize. 3 weeks later, Bryn found herself in a briefing room at a facility that didn't appear on any organizational chart, receiving mission parameters that would take her into operational territory that made her DVGRU assignments look routine by comparison. The personnel conducting the briefing wore uniforms without unit patches, spoke with authority that transcended normal military hierarchy, and discussed objectives that carried implications for national security at the strategic level. Operation Silent Thunder, the briefing officer explained, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from years of managing crises that most people never learned about. Intelligence penetration of American military planning has reached levels that threaten operational security across multiple commands and geographic regions. The situation was more serious than what had been revealed during the Norfolk incident. Enemy intelligence services had apparently achieved systematic access to American operational planning, compromising missions before they could be executed and creating strategic vulnerabilities that affected national security interests globally. Your success in identifying and countering intelligence compromise during Desert Falcon has qualified you for assignment to a task force specifically designed to identify and neutralize hostile intelligence networks that have penetrated American military operations. The assignment represented a significant expansion of her operational authority, moving beyond mission planning into active counterintelligence operations that would require capabilities she'd never used in direct operational contexts. The work would be dangerous, complex, and conducted under operational security protocols that exceeded anything she'd experienced during her DVGRU assignments. The briefing officer consulted classified materials that contained information so sensitive that normal security procedures had been modified to accommodate compartmentalization requirements that exceeded standard classification levels. You'll be working with assets from multiple agencies under cover that will place you in positions where operational failures could result in strategic consequences affecting American interests globally. Over the following months, Brin's assignments took her to locations that ranged from European capitals, where intelligence operations unfolded in diplomatic settings, to forward operating bases in contested territories, where American interests were protected through activities that governments couldn't acknowledge publicly. Her work involved identifying personnel who had been compromised by hostile intelligence services, neutralizing networks that threatened American operational security, and conducting operations that required integration of military capabilities with intelligence assets from organizations that most people didn't know existed. The skills she'd developed during her DVGRU assignments proved directly applicable to counterintelligence operations, but the stakes were higher and the operational environment more complex than anything she'd encountered in traditional military settings. Success required understanding not just tactical procedures, but strategic implications that could affect international relationships and national security policies. In Prague, she identified a communications specialist who'd been providing classified information to Russian intelligence services for over 2 years. The operation required 6 months of careful investigation, developing evidence that would support prosecution while protecting sources and methods that were critical to ongoing intelligence operations. The specialist had been recruited through financial pressure applied to family members living in Eastern Europe, a classical intelligence approach that exploited personal vulnerabilities to gain access to classified American military communications. His cooperation had compromised dozens of operations across multiple theaters, resulting in casualties that could have been prevented with proper operational security. Brin's intervention led to the specialist's arrest and cooperation with American counterintelligence agencies, providing information that enabled identification of additional personnel who'd been targeted for recruitment by hostile intelligence services. The network's neutralization prevented further operational compromises while protecting ongoing activities that were critical to American strategic interests. You know what's fascinating about stories like this? They make you realize how much is happening behind the scenes that we never hear about. The people protecting our national security aren't always the ones you would expect, and they're often fighting battles that the public never knows occurred. If you're invested in seeing how deep this goes, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more layers to this story that are going to blow your mind. In Afghanistan, she worked with Special Operations Forces to identify intelligence leaks that were allowing Taliban forces to anticipate American operations with accuracy that exceeded what battlefield intelligence could explain. The investigation revealed compromised communication protocols that were providing enemy forces with advance warning about American operational intentions. The compromise involved technical vulnerabilities in classified communication systems that had been exploited by intelligence services working with Taliban forces to target American operations. Enemy forces were receiving information about troop movements, operational timelines, and tactical objectives that allowed them to position ambush elements with devastating effectiveness. Brin's technical background enabled her to identify the specific vulnerabilities that were being exploited, working with communication specialists to implement security modifications that closed intelligence gaps while maintaining operational capability. The technical changes prevented further intelligence compromises while protecting American forces from attacks that had been succeeding due to advanced intelligence about operational procedures. Her work in Afghanistan also involved training American personnel to recognize indicators of intelligence compromise, teaching them to identify behavioral changes and communication patterns that could indicate hostile intelligence recruitment. The training program she developed became standard procedure for American forces operating in contested territories where intelligence security was critical to operational success. The program integrated lessons learned from multiple counterintelligence investigations, providing practical guidance that enabled operational personnel to protect themselves and their units from intelligence threats that could affect mission success and force protection. Her training materials became part of pre-deployment preparation for special operations forces across multiple commands. The technology that enables operations like these requires cutting-edge cybersecurity solutions that protect classified communications from sophisticated threat actors. Military-grade encryption systems and secure communication platforms use advanced algorithms and authentication protocols that ensure operational security even in hostile electronic environments. These specialized systems feature quantum-resistant encryption, multi-layer authentication, and real-time threat detection capabilities that protect sensitive information from state-level adversaries. The cybersecurity technology protecting our national security represents the absolute pinnacle of digital defense capabilities. 6 months into her assignment with the Counterintelligence Task Force, Brin received intelligence that suggested the hostile networks she'd been investigating were more extensive and sophisticated than initial assessments had indicated. The intelligence operations affecting American military security involved coordination between multiple foreign intelligence services that had achieved unprecedented access to classified information. The revelation came through communications intercepts that revealed coordination between Russian, Chinese, and Iranian intelligence services in operations targeting American military capabilities. The level of cooperation between traditionally hostile intelligence agencies suggested strategic coordination that exceeded tactical intelligence sharing. "This isn't just espionage," she reported during a secure video conference with task force leadership. "This is systematic intelligence warfare designed to degrade American military effectiveness across multiple theaters simultaneously." The assessment carried implications that extended far beyond counterintelligence operations into strategic planning that would affect American national security policies for years to come. Coordinated intelligence operations by multiple hostile agencies represented a threat that exceeded traditional espionage activities. Her investigation revealed that hostile intelligence services had achieved access to American planning processes through multiple vectors simultaneously. Technical compromises of communication systems, recruitment of personnel with access to classified information, and penetration of contractor organizations that supported military operations. The scope of the intelligence penetration was unprecedented in American military history. Enemy forces were receiving information about American capabilities, operational procedures, and strategic intentions that enabled them to counter American advantages while exploiting vulnerabilities that most people didn't know existed. Brin's work involved coordinating with agencies across the intelligence community to develop comprehensive responses that addressed every aspect of the threat while protecting ongoing operations that were critical to American strategic interests. The coordination required clearances and operational authority that exceeded normal interagency relationships. The counterintelligence operation she helped design involved multiple phases of investigation, evidence development, and operational response that required coordination between military and civilian agencies under security protocols that protected sources and methods while enabling effective action against hostile networks. Phase 1 involved identifying all personnel who had been compromised by hostile intelligence services, using technical capabilities and human intelligence assets to map networks that had achieved access to American classified information. The investigation revealed a compromise that affected personnel across multiple military commands and geographic regions. Phase 2 focused on neutralizing identified networks while protecting ongoing operations that could be affected by premature exposure of counterintelligence activities. The operations required careful timing and coordination to prevent hostile agencies from adapting their procedures in response to American defensive measures. Phase 3 involved implementing security modifications that would prevent future compromises while maintaining operational capabilities that were essential to American strategic objectives. The modifications integrated technical solutions with procedural changes that enhanced security without degrading operational effectiveness. The operation's success depended on coordination between agencies that normally operated independently, requiring integration of capabilities and resources under command structures that transcended traditional organizational boundaries. BRIN's role involved facilitating coordination between military and civilian agencies that had different operational procedures and security protocols. When you're dealing with operations at this level of complexity, the financial implications are staggering. Government contract management and defense spending oversight require specialized financial services that can handle classified budgets, black project accounting, and interagency cost allocation systems. These sophisticated financial management platforms provide audit trails, compliance monitoring, and resource allocation tracking for programs that operate under the highest levels of security classification. Professional financial services for classified operations ensure accountability while protecting sensitive information about capabilities and expenditures that could compromise national security if disclosed. During the 18 months that followed, BRIN's assignments took her to operational environments that tested every aspect of her training and experience. Working under various cover identities, she conducted investigations in civilian settings where hostile intelligence operations unfolded alongside normal social and economic activities. In Berlin, she posed as a graduate student, conducting research on European security issues while investigating intelligence networks that were targeting NATO military personnel for recruitment by Russian intelligence services. The operation required maintaining academic credentials while conducting surveillance and developing intelligence that would enable neutralization of hostile operations. The academic cover provided access to international conferences and research institutions where intelligence operations were conducted under diplomatic and educational cover. Hostile intelligence services used academic and research environments to recruit personnel, with access to classified information, exploiting professional relationships to gain access to sensitive intelligence. Her investigation revealed recruitment operations that targeted American military personnel stationed in Europe, using financial incentives and personal relationships to gain access to classified information about NATO operations and American military capabilities. The networks were sophisticated, well-funded, and operated with security protocols that made detection extremely difficult. The operation required coordination with European counterintelligence agencies under agreements that protected sensitive sources and methods, while enabling collective action against threats that affected Allied security interests. International cooperation was essential, but complicated by different legal frameworks and operational procedures. BRIN's work involved developing evidence that could support prosecutions in multiple legal systems, while protecting intelligence sources that were critical to ongoing operations. The evidence development process required understanding legal procedures in different countries while maintaining operational security that protected American intelligence capabilities. The Berlin operation resulted in the arrest of 12 people involved in intelligence operations, targeting American military personnel, disrupting networks that had been operating successfully for over 3 years. The investigation also identified vulnerabilities in NATO security procedures that were addressed through policy modifications that enhanced protection for alliance personnel. In Singapore, she worked with financial intelligence specialists to identify money laundering operations that were funding hostile intelligence activities targeting American military operations in the Pacific region. The investigation involved tracking financial networks that connected legitimate business operations with intelligence activities that threatened American strategic interests. The financial investigation revealed that hostile intelligence services were using commercial cover to fund operations that targeted American military capabilities in ways that wouldn't be detected through normal intelligence monitoring. Business relationships provided cover for intelligence activities while generating resources that funded extensive operations across multiple countries. Her work involved understanding international financial systems and regulatory frameworks that enabled money laundering operations to function while appearing to be legitimate business activities. The financial networks were complex, involving multiple jurisdictions and regulatory environments that complicated investigation and enforcement. The Singapore operation required coordination with international law enforcement agencies and financial regulatory organizations under agreements that enabled information sharing while protecting sensitive intelligence sources. International cooperation was essential for tracking financial networks that operated across multiple countries and legal systems. Her investigation led to the identification of financial networks that had provided millions of dollars in funding for intelligence operations, targeting American military personnel and operations throughout the Pacific region. The network's neutralization disrupted hostile intelligence activities while providing information that enabled additional investigations. The legal complexities of international counterintelligence operations require specialized legal services that understand both domestic and international law as it applies to national security matters. Military legal education programs and specialized law firms provide expertise in constitutional law, international treaties, rules of engagement, and the legal frameworks that govern intelligence operations. These comprehensive legal services ensure that counterintelligence activities comply with legal requirements while protecting national security interests and the rights of American personnel operating in complex international environments. The success of BRIN's counterintelligence operations attracted attention from organizational levels that operated beyond normal government structures, agencies that existed in the spaces between acknowledged activities and strategic necessities that democratic governments had to address but couldn't discuss publicly. 2 years after her initial assignment to the Counterintelligence Task Force, she received orders for assignment to an organization that didn't appear in any official documentation, conducting operations that required capabilities that exceeded anything she'd encountered during her previous assignments. The new assignment involved working directly with foreign intelligence services that had strategic relationships with the United States, conducting joint operations that addressed threats affecting multiple countries while protecting sensitive intelligence sources and methods that were critical to ongoing activities. Her work involved coordination with British intelligence services on operations targeting Russian intelligence networks that threatened both American and British strategic interests. The cooperation required clearances and operational authority that enabled access to intelligence sources that neither country could develop independently. The joint operations were conducted under agreements that protected each country's most sensitive intelligence capabilities while enabling collective action against threats that exceeded what either country could address independently. The cooperation represented strategic relationships that had developed over decades of shared security interests. BRIN's role involved facilitating operational coordination between intelligence services that had different procedures and security protocols, ensuring that joint operations achieved objectives while protecting sensitive sources and methods that were critical to ongoing activities in multiple countries. The operations she participated in during this period addressed threats that ranged from terrorist networks that targeted Western interests globally to state-sponsored intelligence operations that threatened democratic governments throughout Europe and North America. The scope of the threats required responses that integrated military and civilian capabilities under coordination that transcended normal organizational boundaries. Her assignments took her to operational environments that included diplomatic settings where intelligence operations unfolded alongside normal international relations, to remote locations where American interests were protected through activities that couldn't be conducted through normal military or diplomatic channels. In each environment, success required understanding not just tactical procedures, but strategic implications that could affect international relationships and national security policies for years to come. The work demanded integration of capabilities that most people never encountered, coordination between organizations that operated under different authorities, and decision-making under pressure that could affect strategic outcomes. The training and experience she'd gained during her DivGru assignments provided the foundation for understanding complex operational environments. But the scope and implications of her new work required capabilities that extended far beyond traditional military operations into areas where success depended on understanding political, economic, and social factors that affected strategic outcomes. The global nature of modern threats requires international cooperation on a scale that most people never realize exists. Intelligence sharing agreements, joint operational frameworks, and coordinated response protocols enable democratic nations to address threats that transcend national boundaries while protecting sensitive capabilities and maintaining operational security. These sophisticated cooperation mechanisms represent decades of relationship building and trust development between allied intelligence services that share strategic interests in maintaining international stability and security. During her third year of counterintelligence operations, Brin's work contributed to the identification and neutralization of intelligence networks that had achieved unprecedented penetration of American and Allied military operations. The success of these operations led to strategic changes in how democratic governments addressed intelligence threats that operated across traditional boundaries. Her final major operation involved coordinating a multinational counterintelligence effort that addressed Chinese intelligence operations targeting military technologies that were critical to American and Allied strategic capabilities. The operation required coordination between intelligence services from 6 countries under security protocols that protected each nation's most sensitive intelligence sources. The Chinese operations had achieved access to research and development activities that could affect military capabilities for decades to come. The intelligence theft involved technologies that would provide strategic advantages to Chinese military forces while degrading American and Allied capabilities that were essential to maintaining international stability. Brin's role involved coordinating technical analysis that identified exactly what technologies had been compromised, assessing the strategic implications of intelligence theft, and developing operational responses that would neutralize hostile intelligence networks while protecting ongoing research activities. The operation was successful in identifying and neutralizing Chinese intelligence networks that had operated successfully for over 5 years, preventing further technology theft while protecting research activities that were critical to maintaining American strategic advantages. The success of the multinational operation led to strategic agreements between allied countries that enhanced cooperation on technology protection while strengthening intelligence sharing that would prevent future compromises of critical capabilities. Her work during this period established procedures and relationships that became the foundation for ongoing cooperation between allied intelligence services, creating capabilities that would address future threats while protecting democratic values and strategic interests that transcended national boundaries. The experience provided her with understanding of how strategic threats were addressed at the highest levels of government, how international relationships were managed in crisis situations, and how democratic institutions adapted to address challenges that threaten fundamental security interests. You've been following this story for a while now, and you can probably see how much deeper this goes than where we started. The quiet intelligence officer who was dismissed as a typing pool refugee has proven to be exactly the kind of person who protects national security in ways that most people never understand. This is what real strength looks like, not the obvious kind that everyone recognizes, but the hidden capabilities that make victory possible when everything depends on precision under pressure. After 4 years of counterintelligence operations that had taken her across 3 continents and involved collaboration with intelligence services from multiple allied countries, Brin received notification that her assignment was being modified to address emerging threats that required capabilities she'd developed during her operational experience. The new assignment involved returning to mission planning and operational support, but at organizational levels that transcended her previous DVGRU experience. Her work would involve planning operations that address strategic threats while coordinating with agencies and capabilities that most military personnel never encountered directly. The assignment represented recognition that her combination of technical expertise, operational experience, and strategic understanding qualified her for work that required integration of capabilities across traditional organizational boundaries. The operations she would support addressed threats that affected national security at the highest levels. Her first assignment involved supporting operations that addressed terrorist networks that had achieved capabilities that threatened American strategic interests globally. The networks had evolved beyond traditional terrorist organizations into entities that possessed sophisticated intelligence capabilities and operational reach that exceeded what most people understood about contemporary security threats. The work required understanding how terrorist networks had adapted to counterintelligence pressure while maintaining operational capabilities that enabled them to threaten American interests in multiple countries simultaneously. The analysis demanded integration of intelligence from multiple sources under security protocols that protected sensitive collection capabilities. Her assessment revealed that terrorist networks had achieved unprecedented sophistication in operational security, communication protocols, and strategic planning that enabled them to operate successfully despite extensive international counterterrorism efforts. The networks represented evolutionary adaptation that required new approaches to address threats that traditional methods couldn't counter effectively. The operational responses she helped design integrated military capabilities with intelligence assets and international cooperation under coordination that enabled effective action against threats that operated across traditional boundaries while maintaining security protocols that protected sensitive sources and methods. The operations were successful in disrupting terrorist networks while providing intelligence that enabled additional activities that addressed threats throughout multiple regions. The success demonstrated that emerging threats required capabilities and coordination that exceeded traditional approaches while maintaining values and procedures that protected democratic institutions. Her work during this period contributed to strategic modifications in how the United States addressed terrorism threats that had evolved beyond traditional models, creating capabilities that would be essential for addressing future threats while protecting democratic values that were fundamental to American strategic objectives. The experience provided understanding of how strategic threats were evolving in response to American and allied counterterrorism efforts, how international cooperation could be enhanced to address threats that transcended national boundaries, and how democratic institutions could adapt to address security challenges while maintaining fundamental values. The evolution of global threats requires continuous adaptation of security technologies and operational procedures that most people never see but depend on for their safety and security. Advanced threat detection systems, predictive analytics platforms, and integrated response capabilities use artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify emerging threats while coordinating responses that leverage resources from multiple agencies and allied countries. These sophisticated security systems represent the cutting edge of protective technologies that safeguard democratic societies against threats that operate in the shadows of international relations. 5 years after the Norfolk briefing that had first revealed her capabilities to conventional military personnel, Brin found herself conducting mission planning for operations that addressed strategic threats at levels that exceeded anything she'd encountered during her DVGRU assignments or subsequent counterintelligence work. Her current assignment involved planning operations that would address state-sponsored terrorism networks that threatened American strategic interests while maintaining plausible deniability that protected diplomatic relationships with countries that officially opposed terrorism but couldn't control all activities within their territories. The work required understanding not just tactical and operational procedures, but strategic implications that could affect international relationships for decades to come. The operations she planned had to achieve security objectives while protecting diplomatic initiatives that were essential to maintaining international stability. Her planning integrated military capabilities with intelligence assets and diplomatic resources under coordination that enabled effective action against threats while maintaining relationships that were critical to addressing future security challenges through international cooperation rather than unilateral action. The operations were conducted in environments that ranged from urban areas where terrorist networks operated alongside normal civilian populations to remote territories where state control was limited and terrorist organizations possessed capabilities that approached conventional military forces. Success required understanding local political dynamics, cultural factors, and economic conditions that affected how operations would be perceived by populations that were critical to long-term stability and security. The planning demanded integration of political, economic, and social analysis with traditional military and intelligence assessment, Her work contributed to operations that successfully disrupted terrorist networks while strengthening relationships with allied countries and local populations that were essential to preventing future terrorist activities. The operations demonstrated that strategic threats could be addressed effectively while advancing broader objectives that served long-term security interests. The success of these operations led to recognition that her capabilities qualified her for assignments that addressed the most complex strategic threats facing American security interests, challenges that required integration of all aspects of national power under coordination that transcended traditional organizational structures. What makes stories like this so compelling is how they reveal the complexity of protecting national security in a world where threats don't respect traditional boundaries and success requires capabilities that most people never see in action. The intelligence officer who started this story by being dismissed as administrative support has become exactly the kind of strategic asset that makes victory possible when everything depends on understanding threats that operate in the shadows between nations and institutions. The secure communication that arrived on a Thursday morning, 6 months later, contained routing codes that indicated the highest levels of operational priority. The message was brief, professionally delivered, but carried implications that would affect the trajectory of her career in directions she hadn't anticipated. Ghost 7, immediate reassignment, strategic planning cell activation, authentication, Golden Eagle actual. The authentication code confirmed what the routing indicators had suggested. Her next assignment would involve operational planning at levels that exceeded everything she'd experienced during years of specialized operations. Strategic planning cell activation meant coordination of capabilities across multiple agencies and allied countries under authority that transcended normal command structures. 3 days later, she found herself in a briefing room at a facility that existed in the space between acknowledged government activities and strategic necessities that democratic societies had to address but couldn't discuss publicly. The personnel conducting the briefing represented capabilities that most people didn't know existed within American government structure. Operation Prometheus, the briefing officer explained, consulting materials that contained information classified at levels that required special compartmentalization beyond normal security procedures. Strategic threat assessment indicates hostile state actors have achieved capabilities that threaten fundamental assumptions about American strategic advantages. The threat assessment described developments that could affect the strategic balance that had maintained international stability for decades. Enemy capabilities had evolved to challenge American advantages in ways that demanded responses at the highest levels of government planning and coordination. Your experience with complex operational planning and interagency coordination qualifies you for assignment to a strategic planning cell that will develop responses to threats that affect national security at the constitutional level. The assignment represented the culmination of years of progressively complex operational experience, placing her at the center of strategic planning that would affect American security interests for decades to come. The work would require integration of every capability she'd developed while demanding new skills that few people ever acquired. Her role involved coordinating strategic planning between agencies that normally operated independently, integrating military capabilities with intelligence assets and diplomatic resources under authority that enabled effective responses to threats that transcended traditional categorization. The threats she would address operated in the spaces between military action and intelligence operations, between diplomatic initiatives and economic policies, between domestic security and international relations. Success required understanding how all aspects of national power could be integrated to address challenges that threatened fundamental American interests. The financial and economic implications of strategic planning at this level involve resources and coordination mechanisms that operate beyond normal government budgeting processes. Strategic investment planning, classified program financing, and multi-agency resource allocation require sophisticated financial management systems that can handle complex funding streams while maintaining security protocols that protect sensitive capabilities. These advanced financial planning systems enable coordination of resources across traditional organizational boundaries while ensuring accountability and effectiveness in addressing strategic threats that require sustained commitment over multiple years. The work that followed challenged every aspect of Brin's training and experience, while providing understanding of how strategic threats were addressed at the highest levels of American government. Her assignments involved planning responses to challenges that could affect the fundamental structure of international relations, while maintaining democratic values and procedures that were essential to American strategic objectives. Her planning contributed to operations that addressed threats ranging from state-sponsored cyber attacks that targeted critical infrastructure to diplomatic initiatives that prevented conflicts that could escalate into military confrontations affecting global stability. The scope of the work demanded understanding how tactical actions could have strategic consequences, while strategic policies affected tactical operations. The success of her strategic planning work led to recognition at levels that transcended traditional military and intelligence career paths, opening opportunities for assignments that would address emerging threats while shaping policies that would affect American security for generations to come. Her experience demonstrated that effective strategic planning required capabilities that integrated technical expertise with operational experience, diplomatic understanding with military knowledge, and tactical precision with strategic vision. The combination enabled responses to threats that exceeded traditional approaches while maintaining values that were fundamental to democratic governance. The story that had begun with dismissal and mockery in a Norfolk briefing room had evolved into recognition at the highest levels of American strategic planning, proving once again that real capability often came disguised as weakness, that the most effective responses to strategic threats often originated from people who remained invisible until operational pressure revealed their true value. Professional development in strategic planning and national security policy require specialized education programs that integrate military experience with academic study of international relations, economic policy, and political science. These comprehensive educational programs prepare personnel for assignments that require understanding how all aspects of national power can be integrated to address complex threats while maintaining democratic values and constitutional principles. Strategic education for national security professionals ensures that future leaders understand both the capabilities and limitations of democratic institutions in addressing threats that operate beyond traditional boundaries. As Bryn reflected on the trajectory that had brought her from Montana ranch country to strategic planning at the highest levels of American government, she understood that every assignment had prepared her for challenges that were progressively more complex and consequential. The training her father had provided in precision, patience, and calm decision-making under pressure had proven applicable to environments that neither of them could have anticipated. The technical education she'd received from her mother had provided the analytical foundation for understanding complex systems and identifying patterns in chaos that were essential to strategic planning in environments where traditional approaches weren't sufficient to address emerging threats. Her military experience had provided understanding of how tactical precision contributed to strategic success, how operational security protected capabilities that were essential to mission accomplishment, and how leadership under pressure enabled achievement of objectives that served interests beyond immediate tactical requirements. The counterintelligence work had taught her how threats operated across traditional boundaries, how hostile capabilities evolved in response to American defensive measures, and how international cooperation could address challenges that exceeded what any single country could handle independently. The strategic planning experience was teaching her how all aspects of national power could be integrated to address threats that challenged fundamental assumptions about security and stability while maintaining democratic values that were essential to long-term American strategic objectives. Each phase of her career had built capabilities that prepared her for progressively greater responsibilities while demonstrating that effective service to national security interests required understanding how tactical actions contributed to strategic outcomes that affected the safety and security of democratic societies globally. The work continued in briefing rooms and planning cells where the next generation of threats demanded responses from people who understood that victory often came from capabilities that enemies couldn't anticipate, from people who possess technical expertise combined with operational experience and strategic vision that enabled effective action when everything depended on precision under pressure. The technology systems that enable strategic planning and coordination operate at levels of sophistication that represent decades of development and refinement by the most advanced technical capabilities available to democratic governments. Quantum computing applications, advanced encryption systems, and integrated communication platforms provide the technical foundation for coordination between agencies and allied countries that enables effective responses to strategic threats. These technological capabilities represent continuous innovation in service of protecting democratic values and strategic interests that transcend national boundaries while maintaining security protocols that protect sensitive sources and methods from hostile intelligence services. The secure communication that arrived 18 months later contained notification that would take her operational experience in directions she hadn't anticipated, but that represented a logical evolution of capabilities she'd developed over years of increasingly complex assignments. Strategic planning rotation complete, field assignment authorization, authentication, Atlas Foundation. The authentication code indicated assignment to operational activities that would apply strategic planning capabilities in field environments where tactical precision would serve strategic objectives under conditions that tested every aspect of her training and experience. The assignment represented return to operational activities, but at levels that integrated strategic understanding with tactical requirements, combining field experience with planning capabilities in ways that enabled responses to threats that operated at the intersection of tactical operations and strategic objectives. Her new role would involve conducting operations that addressed strategic threats while maintaining operational security that protected broader capabilities and ongoing activities that were essential to American strategic interests globally. The work would require integration of everything she'd learned during years of progressively complex assignments. The field assignment took her to environments that ranged from diplomatic settings, where intelligence operations unfolded alongside normal international relations, to operational theaters where American interests were protected through activities that required precision and discretion, that left no room for tactical or strategic mistakes. Success required understanding how field operations contributed to strategic objectives while maintaining security protocols that protected capabilities and relationships that were essential to addressing future threats through coordination that transcended traditional organizational boundaries. Her work contributed to operations that achieved tactical objectives while advancing strategic goals that served long-term American security interests in ways that strengthened international relationships and democratic institutions, rather than undermining them through excessive reliance on unilateral action. The operations demonstrated that strategic threats could be addressed effectively through integration of tactical capabilities with strategic planning, diplomatic coordination with operational precision, and international cooperation with national security requirements that protected democratic values while ensuring effective responses to emerging challenges. What's remarkable about following someone's career trajectory like this is seeing how each assignment builds capabilities that prepare for progressively greater challenges and responsibilities. The intelligence officer who started by being dismissed in a Norfolk briefing room has become the kind of strategic asset that democratic governments depend on to address threats that operate beyond traditional boundaries while maintaining values that are fundamental to free societies. This is what real professional development looks like when it serves purposes that transcend individual career advancement. The notification that arrived 5 years later carried implications that represented the culmination of everything she'd accomplished during a career that had taken her from routine military assignments to strategic operations at the highest levels of American government planning and coordination. Assignment modification, training and development role, strategic planning instruction, authentication, Minerva Actual. The new assignment involved sharing expertise she'd developed through years of operational experience, training the next generation of personnel who would address strategic threats while maintaining democratic values and procedures that were essential to American strategic objectives. Her role involved developing training programs that prepared personnel for assignments requiring integration of tactical capabilities with strategic planning, operational security with international cooperation, and national security requirements with democratic institutions that protected constitutional values under operational pressure. The training programs she developed integrated lessons learned from multiple operational environments, providing practical guidance that prepared personnel for assignments that demanded understanding of how tactical actions contributed to strategic outcomes while maintaining values and procedures that protected democratic institutions. Her training emphasized that effective service to national security interests required understanding how threats operated across traditional boundaries, how responses demanded coordination between agencies and allied countries, and how success depended on maintaining democratic values while addressing challenges that tested every aspect of professional preparation and personal character. The personnel she trained would inherit responsibility for addressing threats that would continue evolving in response to American and Allied defensive measures, requiring adaptation and innovation while maintaining fundamental principles that protected democratic societies against threats that operated in shadows between acknowledged activities and strategic necessities. Her training prepared them to understand that success often came from capabilities that remained invisible until operational pressure revealed their true value, that effective responses to strategic threats often originated from people who possess technical expertise, combined with operational experience and strategic vision that enabled precise action when everything depended on performance under pressure. The training program she developed became standard preparation for personnel assigned to strategic operations, ensuring that future generations would possess capabilities necessary to address emerging threats while maintaining democratic values that were fundamental to American strategic objectives and international relationships. The educational and professional development requirements for personnel working at these levels of strategic planning and operational responsibility require specialized training programs that integrate academic study with practical experience under operational conditions. These comprehensive development programs ensure that personnel understand both the capabilities and limitations of democratic institutions while preparing them for assignments that require integration of all aspects of national PUR in service of strategic objectives that protect democratic values and international stability. As she reflected on career progression that had taken her from conventional military service to strategic planning and training responsibilities, Brin understood that every assignment had contributed to capabilities that enabled effective service to national security interests while maintaining democratic values that were essential to American strategic objectives. Her experience demonstrated that effective protection of democratic societies required personnel who understood how tactical precision contributed to strategic success, how operational security protected capabilities that were essential to mission accomplishment, and how international cooperation enabled responses to threats that transcended traditional boundaries. The training program she developed ensured that future personnel would possess capabilities necessary to address emerging threats while understanding that success required integration of technical expertise with operational experience, strategic vision with tactical precision, and national security requirements with democratic values that protected constitutional principles. Her work contributed to institutional capabilities that would address future threats while maintaining relationships and values that were essential to long-term strategic success in protecting democratic societies against challenges that operated beyond traditional categorization or conventional response. The story that had begun with dismissive mockery in a Norfolk briefing room had evolved into recognition that effective protection of national security interests required capabilities that often remained invisible until operational pressure revealed their true value, that strategic success often came from people who possessed technical expertise, combined with operational experience and strategic understanding that enabled effective action when everything depended on precision under pressure. The legacy of careers like this extends far beyond individual accomplishment into institutional capabilities that protect democratic societies for generations to come. The training programs, operational procedures, and strategic relationships that develop through years of professional service create foundations that enable future personnel to address emerging threats while maintaining values and principles that are fundamental to democratic governance and international stability. The secure communication that arrived on her final day of active service contained recognition that transcended traditional military awards or career achievements. Acknowledgement of contributions that had affected strategic outcomes in ways that protected American interests while strengthening democratic institutions and international relationships. Strategic planning contribution recognized at highest levels. Institutional impact assessed as fundamental to national security capabilities for the next generation. Training programs approved for permanent implementation. Authentication, constitutional, actual. The recognition confirmed that her career had contributed to capabilities that would protect American strategic interests for decades to come, while maintaining democratic values that were essential to long-term security and stability in an international environment characterized by threats that operated beyond traditional boundaries. Her training programs would prepare future generations of personnel to address strategic threats while understanding that effective service required integration of tactical capabilities with strategic planning, operational security with international cooperation, and national security requirements with democratic institutions that protected constitutional values under all operational conditions. The institutional capabilities she'd helped develop would enable effective responses to emerging threats while maintaining relationships and procedures that protected democratic societies against challenges that demanded precision and strategic understanding, combined with unwavering commitment to values that were fundamental to American strategic objectives. Her legacy would continue in briefing rooms and planning cells, where future threats would be addressed by personnel who understood that strategic success often came from capabilities that remained invisible until operational pressure revealed their true value, that effective protection of democratic societies required people who possessed technical expertise, combined with operational experience and strategic vision that enabled precise action when everything depended on performance under pressure. The story that had begun with a typing pool joke and dismissive laughter had concluded with recognition that real strength often came disguised as weakness, that the most effective responses to strategic threats often originated from people who remained invisible until operational necessity demanded revelation of capabilities that made victory possible when democratic values and strategic interests converged in service of objectives that transcended individual achievement. In the end, Bryn Cadelis had proven that competence spoke louder than assumption, that professional capability transcended surface appearance, and that democratic societies were protected by people who understood that service to strategic objectives required maintaining values that were fundamental to the institutions and relationships that made such service both possible and necessary. The work would continue with new personnel addressing new threats, but the foundations had been established for capabilities that would protect democratic societies while maintaining values that were essential to strategic success in an international environment where threats and opportunities would continue evolving in response to changing strategic conditions and technological possibilities. Her contribution had ensured that future generations would possess institutional capabilities necessary to address emerging challenges while maintaining democratic values that were fundamental to American strategic objectives and international relationships that protected global stability and security for societies committed to constitutional government and individual liberty under law. The quiet intelligence officer who had once been dismissed as a lost secretary had become exactly the kind of strategic asset that democratic societies depended upon to address threats that operated beyond traditional boundaries while maintaining values that were essential to protecting constitutional government and individual liberty in an international environment characterized by challenges that demanded precision, strategic understanding, and unwavering commitment to principles that transcended immediate tactical requirements.